They say every family has a skeleton in the closet. I always thought ours was more modest, something like an embarrassing marriage or a petty feud over land. But what I found that summer shattered everything I thought I knew about my grandmother. About history, about truth. It began with a storm. I was in the attic of our old countryside home in Bavaria, helping my mother sort through boxes after Grandma Helga passed away. The house smelled of dust, old books, and the faintest trace of her perfume. It felt as though she might walk in at any moment, scold me for getting dirt on my jeans, then offer me tea like nothing happened. I wasn't ready to say goodbye. Not really. We found a letter in a false bottom beneath a wooden trunk. I had knocked it over by accident, and one of the old floorboards cracked beneath it. Inside was a leather pouch, aged and cracked, tied tightly with twine. My mother looked at it, pale as parchment, and said she didn't want to open it, that it was too much. She left me alone in the attic, but I could feel her eyes watching from the stairs. Inside were letters, yellowed papers, photographs, a red armband I dared not touch, and one envelope with a note written in shaky German. For the one who seeks truth. My hands are clean, but my eyes have seen everything. HK, 1946. The letter was in English, surprisingly, addressed to my future grandchildren. I remember my hands trembling as I unfolded the brittle paper. Her handwriting was delicate, almost childlike. The first words made my heart skip. I was once a maid in Adolf Hitler's Berghof residence. I write this not for sympathy, but because silence is no longer an option. My breath caught in my throat. What followed was something between confession, diary, and testimony. I'll try to recount her words as faithfully as I can, though some lines are burned into my memory like a brand. She wrote, "The year was 1943 when I first arrived at the Obersalzberg estate. I was only 18, plucked from Munich like a weed, and told I'd been selected for special service. My mother cried when I left. My father only nodded. The war had taken enough from him already. What was one more daughter to uniformed men? They told us nothing. Not who we'd serve, not where, only that we were to speak little, work fast, and obey completely. The Berghof was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Nestled in the Alps, white stone and glass, overlooking endless forest, it looked more like a sanctuary than a place of war. But beneath the beauty lay dread, the kind you feel in your bones before your mind catches up. I met him on my third day. He wasn't how I expected. No yelling, no madness in the eyes. Just a man, quiet, pale, almost polite. He walked past me as I scrubbed the marble floors, nodding once. The other girls froze. Some even smiled. But I saw it then, the emptiness in his gaze. Like a man looking through glass at a world he no longer belonged to. "What's your name?" he asked me once. "Helga," I said, bowing my head. Strong name. German name. That was it. Our only direct conversation. But after that, I noticed things. Eyes watching me longer than they should. A man with a limp who never spoke, but always followed me. A room I was warned never to enter. The study. Inside, I'd later learn, were maps, documents, and things that even the mountain air couldn't cleanse. I kept a journal. Hid it behind the mirror. If you found it, then perhaps you found the rest. I don't know how to say this plainly, so I'll say it fast. I saw things. I heard things. I cleaned the blood of men who never made it down the mountain. I served wine to monsters dressed in tailored suits. I saw Eva cry once. I don't know why, but I think she saw me watching her. And in that moment, we were two prisoners pretending we had choices. One night, I heard screams. Not from outside, but from the cellar. I was told it was an animal, that it had gotten trapped. But I knew the sound of pain. I knew a human voice when I heard one. I tried to leave once. Packed my bag. Waited until sunrise. But the car never came. They told me the driver was missing. That it was better I stay. I don't know how long I was there. Days became weeks. Time blurred. And then one day, he was gone. Just like that. No goodbye. No goodbye from Eva either. Only the sound of boots, engines, and then silence. The war was turning. The rats were fleeing their golden ship. I left in the night. Walked 10 miles to the village. I never looked back. By the time I finished reading, my hands were ice cold. My grandmother, Helga, the sweet old woman who fed birds, told bedtime stories, and hummed lullabies from her youth. She had been a witness to history's darkest chapter. But this wasn't the end of her letter. At the bottom, written in a different pen, was a second note, dated 1973. If you read this, and you still wish to know the truth, there is more. Much more. Look behind the portrait in the cellar. But be warned, some doors, once opened, refused to close. I sat there for a long time, listening to the storm outside, holding the letter like a secret too heavy for one soul. I thought about that cellar, about what might be hidden behind the old family portrait that hung untouched for decades. I didn't sleep that night. I waited for the rain to stop. Then I went downstairs. The house was quiet, too quiet. That uncanny sort of stillness only found in places that once breathed life, but have since forgotten how. The storm had passed, leaving behind dew-slick windows and a silence so dense I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. I stood at the entrance to the cellar, the old wooden door creaking slightly under the weight of memory. For as long as I could remember, Grandma Helga had kept it locked. She used to say there was nothing down there but dust and mice. But the key had always been on her ring, and now the key was in my hand. It slid in with a reluctant click. The hinges groaned as I pulled the door open, a gust of musty air wafting up to greet me. I stood for a moment, listening. No movement, no whispers, just the deep, cold breath of the past. With each step down the wooden stairs, the temperature dropped. My phone's flashlight barely pierced the darkness, flickering now and then as if struggling to stay awake. And then I saw it, the portrait. It hung crooked on the far wall, covered in a thick veil of cobwebs. I'd seen it only once before as a child, during a game of hide-and-seek. I remembered the eyes, stern, watching. I never came back down after that. It was a painting of a man I didn't recognize. He wore a black coat with silver buttons and sharp features. His gaze wasn't menacing, but cold, indifferent. A strange emblem sat on the bottom right corner, an eagle clutching a serpent. Not quite swastika, not quite military. Something else. Something secret. I pulled the painting from the wall. It was heavier than expected, and behind it, just as the note had promised, was a small wooden door no taller than a suitcase. A hidden compartment built into the brick. My breath caught. My fingers trembled as I pulled it open. Inside were more papers. Dozens. A few cassettes. A metal box with a rusted clasp. I brought them upstairs, laid them out across the dining table. Dust drifted in the sunlight like falling ash. I didn't know where to look at first, so I chose the envelope marked Berghof log, confidential. The pages inside weren't written by my grandmother. The handwriting was rough, male, uneven. There were dates, coded names, and tasks. December 8th, 1943, Swan delivered to upper room. Agent K. Request confirmation from HQ. October 23rd, 1943. Subject E. Sedated. No witnesses, except HK. Keep her silent. January 3rd, 1944. Meeting with AH in West Hall. Discussed migration experiments. Overheard chatter from medical wing. Disturbing. Each line made me feel sicker. But then, a final entry. Different ink. A more familiar hand. It was hers. April 5th, 1945. They came for the tapes. I refused. I don't know what's on them. Only that it was recorded by the guards. Audio from inside room 6. They say it's proof. Of what? I don't know. But I heard it once. Just once. And I still dream of the voices. I looked at the tapes. Unlabeled. Black plastic reels. I didn't own a cassette player, but my father had an old stereo in the garage. I found it, blew off a decade of dust, and fed the first tape into the slot. The sound was grainy. Warped. Then a voice. Faint. German. Nick Schreen. Wir müssen. Es ist Befehl. Then something else. Screams. A child? A woman? I couldn't tell. I ripped the tape out before it could continue. I sat in silence for a long time, shaking. The floor felt unsteady beneath me, like I was no longer standing in the real world. These were things I wasn't meant to hear, things that should have been buried forever. And yet, here they were, in my grandmother's cellar. But the real shock came next. At the bottom of the box was a photo, a black and white image, edges curled with age. For people stood in front of the Berghof, two men in uniform, one woman in a white coat, and a young girl in a maid's dress. She was looking down, face turned just enough that I could recognize the curve of her jaw. It was Helga. Behind her, scrawled in pencil, were the words, Operation Winterglass. The girl sees too much. I stared at that line for hours. What was Operation Winterglass? I turned back to the tapes, this time scanning the rest of the labels. On the bottom of one cassette, almost invisible, was a symbol I'd seen before, the eagle and serpent. I felt like I was drowning. Every discovery only pulled me deeper. What had my grandmother been involved in? What had she seen? Why had she hidden this for so many years? And why leave it all behind for me? The letter had warned me. Some doors, once opened, refused to close. I was beginning to understand. That night, I dreamed of a hallway lined with mirrors. At the end, a small door. Behind it, her. Younger. Pale. Afraid. She whispered, "They never left the mountain." I woke drenched in sweat. In the morning, I found a name scribbled on one of the pages, Dr. Gerhard Eisen. Under it, an address in Vienna. No phone number. Just a note. Survived. Trust no one. It was time to follow the trail. If this man was still alive, he might be the only one who could tell me what Operation Winterglass really was, and what my grandmother had protected me from all these years. But part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know, because once you look into the abyss, it doesn't just look back. It invites you in. I arrived in Vienna under gray skies, the kind that seem to press down on your shoulders, making every step feel heavier than it should. I didn't tell my parents I was going. I told them I needed space, needed time. In a way, that wasn't a lie. All I had was a name, Dr. Gerhard Eisen, and a faded address in Vienna's 5th district, scrawled in my grandmother's unmistakable script. No phone number, no explanation. Just that haunting line, survived. Trust no one. The building was old but elegant. Ivy crept up the stone facade, and a single rusted nameplate still read Eisen. I hesitated before ringing the bell. What was I hoping to find? A witness? A co-conspirator? A victim? What if he refused to speak? What if he was dead? The buzzer crackled. Yes. The voice was thin, cautious. I'm Helga Kruger's grandson. From Bavaria. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. Come up. 5th floor. Alone. The door buzzed open. The stairway creaked as I climbed, the smell of old books and boiled cabbage growing stronger with every level. When I reached the 5th floor, the door was already ajar. He stood in the doorway. Old. Very old. His skin looked like parchment, and he leaned heavily on a cane. But his eyes were terrifyingly clear. Sharp, cold, and calculating. You look like her, he said flatly. In the eyes. I stepped inside without a word. The apartment was a time capsule. Books stacked in towers, maps pinned to the walls, photographs of people whose eyes had been scratched out with ink. A large blackboard in the corner was covered in strings and pins, like something out of a conspiracy thriller. Dr. Eisen motioned for me to sit. She told you about Winterglass? He asked. I nodded. Barely. Just the name. Some tapes. A photo. And a lot of silence. He chuckled darkly. Silence is the only way any of us survived. I leaned forward. What was it? He stared at me for a long moment, weighing something invisible between us. Then he said, Winterglass wasn't just an operation. It was a final experiment. A desperate one. I didn't breathe. By late 1944, the Reich knew the war was lost. But some still believed in a hidden victory, something that could change the future, not the battlefield. They started pulling resources into secret programs, biological, psychological, even paranormal. Winterglass was the worst of them. I blinked. Paranormal? You mean like supernatural? He nodded. They believed memory could be weaponized. That trauma could unlock something ancient in the human brain. We were told we were helping prisoners forget, but we weren't erasing. We were transferring, storing human memory, pain, guilt, identity, into others, into objects, even into locations. Your grandmother, Helga, she saw too much. Not just with her eyes, but with her soul. She was sensitive. She absorbed it, and they realized they could use her. I shook my head, stunned. That's insane. Dr. Eisen didn't blink. Insane, but true. He stood and hobbled to a cabinet, pulling out a metal container. From it, he produced a small photograph, faded, torn. A group of soldiers. Behind them, a building I recognized instantly, the Berghof. That's me, he said, pointing to a thin man on the edge. Medical liaison. I was there when the first trial failed. The subject, Carl Weiss, screamed for 3 days before collapsing. He had dreams that weren't his. Spoke languages he'd never learned. Then he died. He placed the photo down carefully. Helga wasn't supposed to live either, but she did. That's what scared them most. Whatever they put into her, whatever she saw, she kept it, buried it, hid it in silence. That's why they sent the Watcher. I froze. Watcher? He nodded slowly. They always left one, even after the war. A man to watch, to ensure silence. Your family may have called him a neighbor, a friend, but he wasn't. He was insurance. I suddenly thought of Mr. Hoffman, the old man who lived 2 houses down, always lingering, always quiet. He came to every holiday dinner, claimed he had no family. I think I know who it was, I whispered. Dr. Eisen stared at me, his voice dropping to a whisper. Then he knows you found this. I stood, panic rising in my throat. What do I do? He looked at me, deadly serious. You leave. Burn the tapes. Burn everything. Live your life. If you dig deeper, there's no return. I stared at him, trembling. You said memory could be stored, that it could pass on. Are you saying my grandmother passed it to me? Eisen didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out a mirror and held it up. Tell me, have you been dreaming of a hallway? A small door. My legs nearly gave out. Yes, I whispered. He nodded solemnly. Then it's begun. I left Vienna the next morning without sleeping. When I returned home, the cellar had been broken into. The tapes were gone, but not the photograph, not the letter, and not the dreams. They only grew stronger. Now, every night I walk that mirror hallway. I reach the door, and I hear her voice, faint and distant. Don't open it. Don't let them in. But one night soon, I know I will, because the silence is cracking, and something is calling. The dreams returned with violent clarity. At first, they came in fragments, flashes of light, shadows on stone walls, a girl's scream echoing through cold marble halls. But soon they grew longer, more vivid. I began waking in sweat, heart pounding, with the sensation that something had followed me back from the dream world. Every night, I found myself in the same place, a hallway lined with mirrors, stretching endlessly in both directions. Each mirror reflected not my face, but scenes from the past. Soldiers whispering. A woman in a maid's dress crying alone on a staircase. A bloodstained desk. A black notebook with my initials on it, though I had never written in it before. At the end of the corridor, as always, stood a door. Old, wooden, marked with that same strange emblem, the eagle clutching a serpent. The symbol from the Berghof tapes, from the photo in the cellar. I never opened it, until the night it opened on its own. It creaked inward slowly, revealing a dark room filled with whispers. Dozens of voices all speaking at once. Some pleading, some laughing, some sobbing. My feet moved toward it against my will. I reached for the handle and woke up screaming. I couldn't breathe. My sheets were soaked. The room felt wrong. Off. I could still hear the whispers echoing faintly, even though I was awake. I knew I couldn't keep pretending this was just stress, or trauma, or sleep disorder. Something had been passed to me. Memory. Guilt. A wound not mine, yet now part of me. Grandma Helga had carried it all her life, and now it was mine. I returned to the attic at dawn. I had to find something, anything she hadn't shown me before. A clue, a message, an explanation. I ripped through old trunks and boxes until I found it. A velvet pouch tucked inside an old children's book. Inside was a small brass key. Attached to it, a tag with a single word, Wolf. It took me hours to figure out what it meant. And then it hit me, Wolfschanz, the Wolf's Lair, one of Hitler's other wartime bunkers, deep in the forests of present-day Poland. The name had always stuck with me. half fairy tale, half horror story. I remembered hearing whispers as a child that my grandmother had worked in more than one house. I thought they meant literal houses. I never thought they meant bunkers. I booked a train to Ketterson. The journey was long and cold. As the forest deepened, I felt a weight pressing against my chest. By the time I reached the edge of the wolf's lair, snow had begun to fall lightly, blanketing the ruins in silence. Much of the bunker had been blown up near the end of the war. Cracked concrete slabs jutted from the ground like broken teeth. But some of the inner rooms still remained, sealed off from tourists, hidden beneath vines and moss. I wandered for hours. Then I found it, a locked steel hatch behind a collapsed wall, half buried in roots. On the rusted frame, barely visible, was the same eagle and serpent symbol. I reached into my coat and pulled out the brass key. It fit. With a heavy click, the hatch groaned open. Inside was a narrow tunnel. My phone's flashlight trembled as I descended into the earth, the walls damp and claustrophobic. It felt like descending into a memory, or a grave. The tunnel opened into a small chamber. In the center, a desk. On it, a black notebook. And next to it, another cassette player, already loaded. My hand shook as I pressed play. A voice crackled through the static. Not German this time. This is Dr. Heinrich Stahl, recording the results of Subject K, Helga Kruger. Observation number 19. Subject demonstrates increased retention of foreign memories. Dream sharing confirmed. Mirror hallucinations continue. Suggest termination, but High Command insists on further study. Pause. Then a second voice, whispered, female, barely audible. He's not gone. He waits in the door. The mountain sleeps, but the wolf still breathes. I dropped the player. The room seemed to tilt around me. That voice was hers. Young, broken, terrified. I looked at the notebook. Inside, page after page of drawings. Sketches of faces. Rooms. The mirror hallway. The door. Repeated symbols. Repeated words. Don't open it. He's still watching. The memories are alive. At the final page, something new. My name. Written in her handwriting. Lucas. If you're reading this, I'm sorry. I did not choose this. I only carried it. But you are stronger than me. If the door opens, do not run. Look. Listen. Only then will the silence break. I stared at the page for what felt like hours. When I returned to the surface, the snow had stopped. The sun was rising through the pines, painting gold across the bunker ruins. But the warmth didn't reach me. I had one part of the story left, one door left to open, and this time I wouldn't wake up before crossing it. It happened the night I returned from the wolf's lair. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The dreams no longer waited for darkness. They bled into my waking thoughts, flickering like silent film behind my eyes. I saw faces I had never met, heard words I had never learned, felt the weight of hands I had never touched. I wasn't sure who I was anymore, Lucas Kruger or something else. The final note from Grandma Helga had burned itself into my thoughts. If the door opens, do not run. Look, listen. So when the dream came again, when I found myself once more in that endless mirrored hallway, I didn't hesitate. I walked forward, heart pounding, until I stood before the door. It opened before I could reach for the handle. Darkness waited inside. Not empty. Heavy. This time I entered. The air was thick, like breathing through fabric. Whispers tickled the edges of my hearing. Familiar, yet indistinct. The room was circular. No windows. The floor made of stone. In the center stood a single mirror taller than me, framed in iron. Fogged. As I stepped closer, the whispers grew louder, swirling into sentences. He is not gone. The wolf breathes. The memories must pass. I reached out to touch the mirror, and it opened. Not like a door, but like a mind. A fracture. A release. I saw it all. I was her. I was Helga, 18 years old, hands raw from scrubbing marble floors in the Berghof. Cold mornings, eyes averted from boots that clicked like gunshots. I felt the dread again, the constant tension of being watched, of knowing too much. I saw him again. Not the monster in the history books. Just a man. Sick. Pale. Quiet. But still dangerous. Still full of rot. I saw Eva. smoking alone on the balcony, whispering to herself in the dark. I was taken into room 6, strapped down, not tortured, examined, like a specimen, like a vessel. Doctors spoke of preservation, of containment, of psychic imprints. They believed emotions, especially those born from terror, left echoes, like bloodstains on reality, and that certain people could absorb them. They call me the carrier. I screamed, cried, begged, then silence. Not peace, emptiness. My memories blurred, others invading. Faces I'd never seen became family. Sins I had never committed felt like mine. They poured the war into me. Their shame, their pain, their guilt. They locked it all inside me like a vault. And then they left. The vision shifted again. I was back in Bavaria. The war had ended. The uniformed men were gone, but one remained. Watching, waiting. Mr. Hoffman. He called himself a neighbor. But he came once a week to drink tea and stare at the wall where I had hidden the portrait. He never spoke of the war. Never aged. I saw myself. Helga, placing the tapes in the attic. Writing the letter. Holding my breath. Hoping the silence would be enough to contain it. And then a final image. My grandmother, aged, fragile, standing before the mirror in her bedroom. The same mirror I now stood before. She whispered, "You'll carry it next. But maybe you'll be strong enough to break it." I collapsed. Back in the hallway. Back in the dream. But this time I wasn't alone. Across from me stood a boy. My age. My height. But it wasn't me. He stepped forward, mirror-like, and said in a voice layered with others, "You know now. You've seen it." I nodded, shaking. "What do I do with it?" He looked at me, eyes full of every memory I just relived. "Let it die with you, or set it free." I hesitated. What happens if I set it free? His voice trembled. Then the world remembers. The hallway began to collapse. Mirrors shattered one by one. Whispers turned to screams. The door slammed shut behind me. I woke up choking, back in my bed, tears on my face, blood on my palm, from gripping something too tightly. The key, still in my hand. That morning, I packed everything. The notebook, the tapes, the photo, the velvet pouch. I took them to a secluded spot in the woods near my grandmother's house, where she used to take me as a child to pick berries and tell me stories. There, I built a fire. I watched the flames consume the pages. The plastic warped. The ink burned. And I felt it, the silence breaking. Not violently, but like ice melting. I heard her voice one last time, soft behind me. "Thank you, mein Junge." I didn't turn around. I just whispered, "I'm sorry it was yours to carry alone." Then I walked away. It's been 6 months. The dreams come less often now. Sometimes I still see the door. Sometimes I hear the whispers, but they don't pull at me like before. I've started writing again. Not just the story, but everything, what I saw, what she lived, what I remembered. And one day, I will publish it. Not to expose, not to blame, but to remember. To show the world the cost of silence. My grandmother was not a monster. She was a girl, a maid, a witness, and a vault. Now, I am the vault, but I am also the key, and I choose to leave the door open, not to darkness, but to truth.